Thanksgiving has always been a time for family, a time for warmth, laughter, and forgiveness. But for Emma Parker, the holiday had become a painful reminder of everything she'd lost. Once the heart of her family, she now lived miles away from the place she once called home, carrying wounds that time had not yet healed. For years, silence replaced conversation. Pride replaced love. And letters, unanswered letters, became the only bridge between her and her parents. Yet somewhere deep within her heart, Emma still believed that love had one last chance to find its way back. This is the story of that chance, of heartbreak and reconciliation, of family torn apart and pieced together again. It's a story that reminds us that forgiveness isn't always loud or perfect. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it comes in small gestures, trembling words, and unexpected moments of grace. And sometimes it arrives on a snowy Thanksgiving morning, wrapped not in presents, but in peace. The November wind was biting that morning, sharp enough to sting the skin and whisper warnings of the cold to come. I could hear the rustle of dry leaves scraping across the porch, tapping lightly against the old wooden steps like faint knocks. Thanksgiving Day had always been a time of warmth, family, and full bellies. But this year, something felt different. Something felt wrong. I sat near the window, watching frost creep along the glass, tracing delicate patterns like the veins of frozen tears. My name is Eleanor Bryant, 72 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and a grandmother to a little boy named Oliver, my light, my joy, and the last piece of happiness I had left in this world. Oliver was only 9, small for his age, but with eyes that sparkled brighter than the stars I used to teach him about. He loved stories, puzzles, and his favorite, helping me in the kitchen while pretending to be a chef. But since his parents, my son Michael and his wife Lydia, decided that I was too old-fashioned, I had seen him less and less. Family gatherings had turned into awkward silences. Phone calls became formalities. And this Thanksgiving, they told me not to come at all. "Mom," Michael had said over the phone, his voice tight, "Lydia wants to host just the immediate family this year. Maybe next time, all right?" Immediate family? I repeated quietly, though I knew what that meant. "I'm your mother, Michael." "I know," he said softly. "It's just, Lydia wants things calm. You understand." I understood perfectly. I was no longer part of things. So, I baked a small pie for one, roasted half a turkey breast, and set the table by myself, one plate, one glass, one fork. I thought about Oliver and wondered if he'd notice I wasn't there. The hours passed slowly. The wind grew louder, howling through the chimney. I wrapped myself in a shawl and tried to focus on gratitude, the warmth of the fire, the roof over my head, the little photograph of Oliver smiling on the mantel. But my heart refused to be still. Then, sometime near dusk, I heard something faint. A soft sound, barely audible beneath the wind. Knock, knock. At first, I thought I imagined it. I lived far enough from town that no one visited without calling. But then it came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. My knees creaked as I stood up and walked to the door. When I opened it, the cold slammed into me like a wall. And there, on my porch, trembling from head to toe, was my grandson, Oliver. He wasn't wearing a coat. His cheeks were red and wet with tears. His small hands were shaking so badly that the little backpack he carried almost slipped off his shoulder. "Grandma," he whispered, his teeth chattering. "It's so cold." I froze. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. Then instinct took over. "Oliver!" I cried, pulling him inside. "Sweetheart, what on earth? You're freezing." I wrapped him in my shawl, sat him near the fireplace, and rubbed his hands gently. His lips were blue, but his eyes, oh, those eyes, were full of heartbreak. "I ran away," he said softly. The words hit me like a stone. "Ran away?" I echoed. "From your house? But why?" He didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, silent tears rolling down his face. "They were eating turkey," he said after a moment. "Everyone was laughing. I asked if we could call you. Mommy said no. Daddy said to sit down and be quiet. But I wanted you there, Grandma. You always make Thanksgiving fun. You tell stories. You let me help. So I went to my room, got my backpack, and I walked." My chest tightened painfully. I could picture it. The laughter, the warmth, the golden turkey on the table, while my grandson was walking alone in the freezing wind. "Oliver," I whispered, brushing a tear from his cheek. "How far did you walk?" He shrugged, but his little shoulders trembled. "I don't know. I just kept walking until I saw your mailbox." I wanted to cry. Instead, I smiled weakly and said, "Well, you're here now, my brave boy. You did the right thing coming to me." After wrapping him in blankets and giving him some hot cocoa, he finally began to relax. His tiny hands clutched the mug tightly as though it were life itself. "Grandma," he said after a while, "why doesn't Mommy like you?" That question cut deeper than any I'd ever been asked. I hesitated, searching for words a 9-year-old could understand. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "people don't understand each other. And when they don't, they grow apart. But that doesn't mean I don't love your mommy, or your daddy, or you." He nodded silently, staring into the fire again. "I love you, Grandma." That was all I needed to hear. Later that night, I tucked him into the guest bed. He fell asleep quickly, still clutching the corner of my old quilt. I sat there for a long time, watching him breathe, remembering when Michael was that small. How had things gone so wrong? I thought of the last Thanksgiving we'd all spent together. Lydia had made her famous cranberry sauce, and I'd accidentally spilled some gravy. She'd snapped at me in front of everyone, and Michael hadn't said a word. It was small, so small, but that was the day something changed. Since then, every visit had felt like walking on glass. Every conversation had an edge. Until, finally, I just stopped trying. But tonight changed everything. My grandson had walked through the cold to find warmth, not in their big house filled with laughter, but in my small, lonely home. When morning came, the snow had started to fall. Oliver was still sleeping peacefully. I went to the kitchen, made breakfast, and watched the flakes dance outside the window. Then the phone rang. I hesitated before answering. "Mom." Michael's voice was frantic. "Oh, thank God. Did Oliver come to your place? We've been looking everywhere." I took a deep breath. "Yes, he's here. He's safe." There was silence on the other end, followed by a rush of relief. "I'm coming to get him," Michael said quickly. I looked at the sleeping boy, then out at the snow. "He's still resting. You can come, but don't you dare raise your voice at him. He's been through enough." Michael sighed heavily. "All right." An hour later, he arrived. He looked tired, guilt written all over his face. When he saw Oliver asleep under my quilt, his expression softened. "I didn't know he'd do this," he whispered. "I should have let you come." "Yes," I said quietly. "You should have." He turned to me, eyes red. "Lydia, she thought it would be easier. But I think we forgot what really matters." I didn't say anything. I just nodded toward the sleeping child. "Your son remembered," I said softly. "Maybe it's time the rest of us do too." Michael lowered his head. "Can we stay for breakfast?" I smiled faintly. "I thought you'd never ask." That morning, as snow fell gently outside, I set 3 plates on the table instead of 1. Oliver woke to the smell of pancakes and laughter. For the first time in years, the house felt like home again. But as I watched them eat, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the beginning of a long journey, one filled with healing, forgiveness, and truths that had been buried for far too long. Because sometimes, it takes a child's courage to thaw the frost between generations. And sometimes, the warmest Thanksgiving isn't around the fullest table, but the one where love finally returns. The house was quieter than usual that morning, though the air still carried the soft hum of something unfamiliar, peace. The smell of pancakes lingered long after the plates had been cleared, and little Oliver's laughter still echoed faintly from the hallway, bouncing like sunlight off the walls that had been lonely for too long. Michael and I sat across from each other, the old kitchen table between us like a river that once connected two lands but had now eroded with time and silence. He stirred his coffee absently, eyes lowered. "I didn't know, Mom," he said finally, his voice quiet, almost broken. "I didn't know Oliver missed you that much." I smiled sadly. Children see more than we give them credit for. They can feel when love is missing from the room. Michael nodded slowly. "Lydia and we've been having a hard time. Ever since Dad passed, things haven't felt right. You know how she is about control. She needs everything perfect, and when you're around." "When I'm around," I interrupted softly, "I remind her that perfection doesn't exist. And that bothers her." He looked up, guilt flickering in his eyes. "She thinks you judge her." I chuckled faintly. "I don't judge her, Michael. I pity her. She spends so much energy trying to prove something to everyone, maybe even to herself. I just wish she'd let herself be loved." He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "She says you make her feel small. Like she's not good enough." That stung. "Good enough for what?" "For you," he whispered. I leaned back in my chair, my heart heavy with memories. Lydia. Sharp-tongued, beautiful, ambitious. From the very first day Michael brought her home, I had sensed something cold beneath her charm. It wasn't that she was cruel, she was simply terrified. Terrified of being seen as less. She'd grown up poor, working her way through college, always surrounded by people who had more money, more stability, more love. When she married my son, she thought she'd finally earned her place. But I think she always feared I looked down on her, even though I never did. I could still remember that first Thanksgiving we'd all shared together as a family. Lydia had spent the entire morning in the kitchen, barking orders, burning half the food, and then crying when Michael tried to help. I had offered to assist, gently, but she snapped at me. "I don't need your help, Eleanor," she'd said, her voice brittle. "I know how to cook." I had simply smiled and stepped back. But inside, I felt something unravel. That was the moment the wall began to rise between us. Michael was still speaking, pulling me back to the present. "She's not a bad person, Mom. She just doesn't understand where you're coming from." "And where am I coming from, Michael?" He hesitated, eyes glancing toward the hallway where Oliver was playing quietly. "From love," he admitted. "But she doesn't see that. She sees your love as interference." That made me laugh softly. "Interference? Love shouldn't feel like that." He nodded, his expression pained. "She's not as strong as you. I think that's what scares her." I looked at my son then, the man who had once been my little boy, who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and say, "These are for you, Mommy. They're flowers even if they're not pretty." Now he sat across from me, worn down by the weight of adult life, torn between his wife and his mother, his heart stretched in two directions. "Michael," I said gently, reaching across the table to touch his hand, "I don't want to be another problem for you. I just want my grandson to grow up knowing that love isn't something that can be locked away." He squeezed my hand lightly. You've never been a problem, Mom. You've always been the solution. I just forgot that for a while. A small sound interrupted us, the soft shuffle of feet. Oliver appeared in the doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. His hair was a mess, sticking up like a halo of chaos. "Morning, Grandma," he murmured, yawning. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, smiling. "Did you sleep well?" He nodded and climbed into my lap, his head resting against my shoulder. It was moments like this that made everything worth it, the weight of his small body, the trust in his embrace, the way his heart beat in rhythm with mine. Michael watched quietly, his expression unreadable. I could see the conflict in his eyes. Guilt. Regret. "I should get him home soon," he said finally. I stiffened. "You can stay for lunch." He hesitated. "Lydia's expecting us." "Lydia can wait," I said firmly. "For once, she can wait." He looked at me for a long time before sighing. "Just for lunch." As the hours passed, we began cooking together like old times. Oliver mashed the potatoes, half of which ended up on the floor, and Michael set the table, humming softly. It felt almost like the years had melted away, like we were a family again, not strangers bound by blood and silence. While the food simmered, I stepped out onto the porch to breathe in the crisp winter air. Snowflakes drifted lazily down, soft and silent. Behind me, through the window, I saw Michael lift Oliver and twirl him in the air, both of them laughing. The sight brought tears to my eyes. How had I let pride, misunderstanding, and pain rob us of moments like these? The truth was, it wasn't just Lydia's fault. I had played my part too. I had been too proud to bend, too stubborn to reach out first. I'd assumed time would heal everything on its own, but time doesn't heal silence. It feeds it. That evening, when they finally left, Oliver hugged me tightly at the door. "I love you, Grandma," he whispered again. "Next time, can we make pumpkin pie too?" I smiled, holding back tears. "Of course we can, my little chef." Michael lingered on the porch after Oliver ran to the car. He looked at me, eyes heavy with something unspoken. "Mom," he said quietly, "Lydia doesn't know he came here. She was furious when she found his room empty. Who told her I'd found him at a friend's place?" I frowned. "You lied." He nodded shamefully. "She wouldn't understand." "Not yet." I wanted to be angry, but I understood. Some truths need to be softened before they're spoken. "Michael," I said gently, "don't hide forever. Sooner or later, you'll have to tell her the truth. If not for you or me, then for Oliver." He nodded slowly. "I will. I just need time." After they drove away, I stood in the doorway, the cold wind brushing against my cheeks. The snow was falling harder now, the world outside turning white and quiet. But inside me, something had thawed. The echoes of the past, those bitter arguments, those years of distance, still lingered, but they no longer defined me. I was still here. I was still family. And for the first time in a long while, I believed things could change. As I turned off the lights and walked toward my bedroom, I whispered a silent prayer of thanks, not for the turkey or the warmth or even the peace, but for the tiny heartbeat that had knocked on my door and reminded me that love, once frozen, can still be rekindled. 3 days after Thanksgiving, the snow had deepened into a soft white blanket that covered the streets, muffling every sound. I had just finished shoveling my porch when I heard the sound of tires crunching on the driveway. A sleek, dark SUV pulled up, its windows tinted against the morning light. My heart gave a small, uneasy flutter. Lydia stepped out. She was wrapped in a long beige coat, her hair perfectly styled, her lips painted a cold shade of crimson. Even in the freezing air, she looked immaculate, too perfect, like someone afraid to show a single flaw. I wiped my gloves on my apron and straightened up, my breath fogging the air. "Lydia," I said, my voice calm but wary. "I wasn't expecting you." Her gaze was sharp, assessing. "Clearly." She walked up the steps, her heels clicking on the wood. "We need to talk." The words felt heavy. I opened the door silently, letting her in. The warmth of the house met her like an old memory she didn't want to feel. "Coffee?" I asked out of habit. She shook her head, her jaw tight. "No. Thank you." We stood in the kitchen, the tension between us thick as winter fog. She glanced around, at the photographs on the walls, the ticking clock, the plate of cookies on the counter. Her eyes paused on a drawing pinned to the fridge, a child's sketch of a smiling stick figure labeled Grandma. "Oliver made that," I said softly. "I know," she replied, her voice colder than the snow outside. "He told me." We sat at the table, and for a long while, neither of us spoke. I waited, letting the silence do its work. Lydia had always hated silence. It made her feel vulnerable. Finally, she folded her hands together. "I know Oliver came here." I didn't flinch. "Yes," I said simply. "He did." Her eyes flickered. "You didn't call me." "No," I said. "He was freezing, Lydia. I wasn't going to waste time on the phone when he needed warmth and safety." She inhaled sharply. "Do you have any idea how terrified I was? My son ran away. Do you know what that feels like?" My voice rose before I could stop it. "Do you know what it feels like, Lydia? To be shut out of your family? To be told you don't belong at the table you helped build?" She blinked, stunned by the sharpness in my tone. For a moment, she looked less like the elegant woman who ruled her home and more like a frightened girl caught in a storm. We sat in silence again, both of us breathing heavily. I took a deep breath and spoke softly this time. "Lydia," I said, "Oliver came here because he felt unwanted. He missed me. That should tell you something." Her voice trembled, though she tried to hide it. "He's a child. He doesn't understand how complicated things are. Children understand love, Lydia, better than adults ever do." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You think I don't love him? You think I'm some heartless woman keeping him from you?" I met her gaze evenly. "I think you're afraid of love that doesn't come with control." She froze. The color drained slightly from her face. "What did you say?" "You heard me," I said quietly. "You want everything perfect. The house, the meals, the holidays. But love isn't perfect. It's messy, it's loud, it's full of mistakes. You can't schedule it or tame it. You can only accept it." Her lip quivered for a moment before she pressed it tight again. "You don't know what I've been through." "Then tell me," I said gently. "Help me understand." For a long time, she didn't speak. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fireplace from the next room. When she finally did, her voice was so soft I almost didn't catch it. "My mother," she said slowly, "used to leave me alone every Thanksgiving. She'd promised she'd come home early from work, but she never did. I'd wait by the window with a plate set for two, watching the clock, hoping she'd walk through the door. She never did." Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "When Michael brought me to his family that first Thanksgiving, and you told that story about him burning the turkey as a boy, everyone laughed and I laughed too, but inside I was terrified. Terrified that one day, someone would laugh at me the way you laughed at him." I didn't want to be the one who didn't belong. I felt something soften inside me, pity, understanding, sorrow. "Oh, Lydia," I whispered. "No one ever meant to make you feel that way." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "You didn't have to mean it. I already believed it." I stood up and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. "You know," I said, "when Michael was little, I used to worry I'd never be good enough for him either. I was a single mother for years before I met his father. I couldn't give him much, just stories and love. But he grew up strong, kind. You helped shape that, Lydia. Whether you know it or not." She looked at me then, eyes wide, unsure whether to believe me. "I'm not your enemy," I said softly. "We both love the same boy. We both want him safe, happy, and warm. So why are we fighting?" Her lips trembled. "Because I don't know how to stop." That was the first honest thing she had ever said to me. I poured her a cup of coffee anyway, even though she'd refused it earlier. She accepted it this time, her hands shaking slightly. "Oliver talks about you all the time," she admitted after a pause. "He tells his teachers how his grandma makes the best pancakes. He draws pictures of your house. I didn't want him to depend on you too much." "Why not?" I asked gently. She hesitated. "Because I was afraid he'd love you more than me." My heart ached at her words. I reached across the table and took her hand, something I had never done before. Her skin was cold, fragile, but she didn't pull away. "Love doesn't divide, Lydia," I said softly. "It multiplies. There's no limit to how much of it we can give or receive. You don't lose your son because he loves me. You gain a stronger, happier boy." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt him. I just wanted to do things right." "You still can," I whispered. "It's never too late." For a long while we sat together, two women from different worlds, bound by love for the same child and the mistakes that came with it. The anger that once filled the room had melted away, leaving behind something raw and human. Finally, she stood and smoothed her coat. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for taking care of him that night." "Anytime," I replied. "My door will always be open to him, and to you." She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. For the first time in years, I saw something genuine in them, gratitude, maybe even a glimmer of respect. Before leaving, she paused at the doorway. "Would you like to come for dinner next weekend?" she asked softly. I smiled, surprised. "I'd like that." When the SUV disappeared down the snowy road, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the tracks fade into the white. The house felt strangely warm again, not from the fire, but from something deeper, a fragile peace, born from pain and understanding. The past had echoed loudly for too long. But now, for the first time in years, those echoes were starting to fade. As I turned toward the quiet house, I whispered softly to myself, "Maybe this time, the table will have enough room for all of us." The smell of roasted turkey still lingered in the air, thick and warm, mixing with the faint aroma of apple pie cooling on the counter. Plates clattered softly as laughter drifted through the dining room, that same easy laughter that once filled every Thanksgiving in this house. But tonight, that sound felt foreign to me, like it belonged to a family I didn't recognize anymore. I stood quietly in the doorway watching them. My daughter, Marlene, sat at the head of the table. Her husband, David, carved the turkey, joking about how he should have been a chef. My grandson Finn, the one who had been standing out in the cold not long ago, was now sitting in the far corner, a blanket draped over his shoulders. His cheeks were still pale, but he was there, safe and warm, his fork pushing at the mashed potatoes rather than eating them. No one seemed to notice me at first. Maybe they didn't want to. It was Marlene who finally looked up, her laughter fading when her eyes met mine. "Mom," she said softly, setting her wine glass down. "You're still here." "I live here," I said, my voice calm but firm. The room went quiet. David cleared his throat and offered a half smile. "Why don't you join us, Mrs. Geller? There's plenty of food." Plenty of food. I looked at the golden turkey, the perfectly set table, the cranberry sauce glistening like rubies. Everything was as it should be, everything except the way they'd let that boy freeze outside while they ate in comfort. Ethan looked up then. His small voice broke the silence. "Grandma, can I sit next to you?" Marlene's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I nodded, pulling out the chair beside me. Ethan came over, his small hands trembling as he clutched his plate. When he sat down, I wrapped my shawl around his shoulders, pulling him close. No one spoke for a while. The clink of silverware filled the silence, along with the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Marlene sighed. "Mom, we didn't mean for him to stay outside that long. He was throwing a tantrum. We thought some fresh air might help." "Fresh air?" I said quietly, my eyes fixed on the boy beside me. "It's 30 degrees outside, Marlene." She looked away. "He has to learn consequences. You spoiled him. You always did." Ethan shrank back in his chair. I could feel his little shoulders tense under my hand. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice steady. A child should learn kindness before consequences. David spoke up then, his tone defensive. "We're doing what's best for him. You raised your kids your way, and we're raising ours our way." I smiled faintly, though my heart ached. "Then maybe that's where I went wrong," I said. "Because I taught my children to love, not to turn away." The words hung heavy in the air. Marlene pushed her plate away, her eyes glistening. "You always make me feel like I'm not enough, Mom. Like whatever I do is wrong." I wanted to say something, anything, to fix that wound, but the truth was, some cracks ran too deep. Instead, I looked at her gently. "I just want you to see the good that's still in front of you." Ethan leaned against me then, his little voice whispering, "I'm sorry, Grandma." My heart broke and healed all at once. "You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart," I said softly. "You didn't do anything wrong." Dinner went on in uneasy silence. The clinking of forks and the soft hum of the refrigerator were the only sounds that dared to exist between us. I looked around the table and remembered the Thanksgivings of the past, when Marlene was a girl, sitting in that same spot, her face glowing as she begged for more pumpkin pie. Back then, love was simple. We didn't need perfection, we only needed each other. Now, the warmth in the room felt artificial, like a fire painted on a wall. When everyone was finished, I stood up to clear the plates. David tried to protest, but I waved him off. "It's fine. Let me clean up. It helps me think." As I gathered the dishes, I felt Ethan slip off his chair and follow me into the kitchen. He tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma, can I stay with you tonight?" I looked down at him, his eyes wide and filled with the kind of sadness a child shouldn't know. I nodded. "Of course, my dear. You'll stay in the guest room. I'll make it nice and warm." He smiled faintly, and for the first time that evening, I felt a small spark of hope. When I returned to the dining room, Marlene was standing by the window, staring out at the night sky. "He wants to stay with me," I said quietly. She didn't turn around. "I figured. He always did prefer you." "That's not true," I replied. "He loves you. He just needs safety." The kind that doesn't come from rules or silence. Her voice broke. I'm trying them. You think it's easy? Between work, bills, and everything else. I set a hand on her shoulder. I know. You're doing your best. But sometimes love isn't about doing everything right. It's about being there when it matters most. She finally turned, her eyes red. Do you ever wish you'd done things differently with me? I smiled sadly. Every mother does. But I never stopped loving you. Not for a moment. Something shifted between us then. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood in the kitchen with a cup of tea. Snow had begun to fall outside, soft and silent. The world was still again. Ethan's laughter echoed faintly from the guest room. For the first time that day, I smiled. Maybe this Thanksgiving wasn't about what we'd lost. Maybe it was about what we still had, the fragile chance to make things right. And as the clock struck midnight, I whispered to the quiet house, "Thank you for giving me another chance." The next morning arrived quietly, with the pale sunlight filtering through the frost-laced windows. The smell of cinnamon and wood smoke filled the kitchen. I had been awake for hours, unable to sleep. The house was still, too still for the morning after Thanksgiving. Ethan was still sleeping soundly in the guest room, tucked under a thick quilt. His small hand peeked out from beneath it, fingers curled gently. Watching him, I felt both warmth and sadness. How could such innocence live in a world that had already begun to bruise it? As I moved to tidy up the dining table from the night before, something caught my eye, a folded envelope sitting beside the centerpiece, its edges worn, my name written across the front in Marlene's handwriting. I hesitated. The last time she'd written to me was years ago, back when she'd moved out after that terrible fight about her father. My heart clenched as I picked it up and slid my finger under the seal. The letter inside was short, but every word was heavy. I know last night didn't go the way I hoped. I saw how you looked at me, how disappointed you were. You think I'm cold, cruel even. Maybe I am. But it's hard being the one holding everything together. David doesn't understand, and I don't have the strength to keep pretending I'm fine. Ethan, he's different. He feels things deeply, just like you. And I don't know how to handle that. I push him away because I don't know how to comfort him without breaking down myself. I found a letter from Dad in your old chest last week. He wrote it before he died, and reading it made me realize something. Maybe I've been angry at the wrong person all these years. I'm sorry for last night, and for a lot of other things too. I hope you'll forgive me one day. Marlene. I stood there, the letter trembling in my hand. My throat tightened. The memory of my late husband, Daniel, washed over me like a cold tide. It had been 15 years since he passed, and yet his presence lingered in the corners of this house. The faint scent of tobacco in the den, the creak in the floorboard he used to complain about. What letter had she found? I didn't remember any. I hurried to the attic, climbing the narrow staircase that groaned under my feet. Dust hung in the air like fine mist. The old wooden chest sat where it always had, beneath a faded quilt. I opened it, my fingers trembling, and sure enough, beneath old photographs and yellowed recipe cards, was another envelope. This one was addressed to me. I hadn't seen it before. How had I missed it all these years? I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable, Daniel's looping, confident script. My dearest Ellen, if you're reading this, it means my time has run shorter than I hoped. I don't want you to cry for me. I want you to remember that love doesn't end, it just changes form. Take care of Marlene. She's stubborn, like her mother, but she has your heart. She'll build walls when she's hurting. Don't let her push you away. And if one day she forgets what kindness looks like, show her, not with words, but with patience. Tell her I'm proud of her, no matter what. And when the house feels too quiet, when you miss my voice, just open the window. I'll be there in the wind. Forever yours, Daniel. Tears blurred the ink as I folded the letter back up. All those years I'd thought I was the one left behind, yet Daniel had somehow stayed. As I sat in the attic, the morning sun caught the dust motes in the air, turning them to gold. A strange calm settled over me. Downstairs, I heard soft footsteps, Ethan's. Grandma? His voice floated up the stairs. I'm here, sweetheart, I called back. He climbed up carefully, clutching his stuffed bear. His eyes were still sleepy. Mom's crying, he said quietly. My heart skipped. Crying? He nodded. In the kitchen. I think she found something. I followed him downstairs, the letter still in my hand. Marlene was sitting at the table, her face buried in her arms. Beside her was another piece of paper, a letter just like mine. When she looked up, her eyes were swollen. I didn't know he wrote to you too, she whispered. I sat across from her, the silence between us filled with years of unspoken words. Your father loved us both more than we ever understood. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. I read his words again this morning. He said to forgive you, forgive myself. I reached out and took her hand. Then maybe it's time we listened to him. For the first time in years, she didn't pull away. She squeezed my hand back. Ethan watched us silently, a small smile forming as if he sensed something sacred was happening. Does that mean we're happy again? He asked softly. Marlene laughed through her tears. I think it means we're trying. I smiled. And sometimes that's enough. The morning sunlight flooded the room then, spilling over the table, the dishes, the photographs on the wall. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel haunted by the past. It felt alive with possibility. As we sat there, I realized something profound. Forgiveness doesn't erase the hurt, but it loosens its grip. It allows love to breathe again. Later that afternoon, Marlene went to the attic to put away the letters. When she came back down, her expression was softer, lighter somehow. Mom, she said, I think Dad would be proud of us. I nodded, my eyes misting. I think so too. We spent the rest of the day together, the three of us. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The silence was comfortable this time, full of unspoken love and shared memory. That evening, as I watched Ethan and Marlene play a quiet board game by the fireplace, I reached for Daniel's letter again. I read the last line over and over. When the house feels too quiet, open the window. I'll be there in the wind. I walked to the window and cracked it open. A cool breeze drifted in, gentle and calm, brushing against my face like the touch of an old friend. For the first time since Daniel's passing, I whispered, "Thank you." And somewhere, in the hush of that golden evening, I could have sworn I heard his laughter, soft and free, mingling with the sound of the wind. The following week brought with it an uneasy calm, like the quiet before a storm. The letter from Daniel had brought tears, yes, but also a strange sense of hope. Marlene and I had spoken more in those few days than we had in years. Still, beneath the warmth of reconciliation, there lingered something raw, something waiting to surface. Ethan was happier, spending his afternoons by the fireplace, sketching little pictures of us together. He had drawn one of the three of us, me, Marlene, and himself, holding hands beneath a blue sky. It was childlike and pure, yet when I looked at it, I couldn't help but notice there was no sign of David. It was small but telling. That Saturday evening, the tension finally broke. David came home late, his footsteps heavy, the smell of alcohol lingering faintly in the air. I was in the kitchen, baking cookies with Ethan, while Marlene sat in the living room, staring into the fire. When David walked in, his voice was tight. "What's going on here? Smells like a bakery." Ethan smiled shyly. "Grandma's teaching me her cookie recipe." David's tone softened for a second. "That's so." But when his eyes met mine, I saw the flicker of resentment there. It had been there for years, buried beneath polite words and forced smiles. Marlene looked up. "You're home early." "Yeah, traffic wasn't bad," he replied, setting down his coat. "You didn't answer my texts." She didn't respond. I could feel the shift in the air, the tension weaving between them like invisible thread. Ethan sensed it too. He gripped my arm. David turned his gaze toward me. "So, Ellen, how long are you planning to stay?" His words were sharp, casual only on the surface. "I live here," I said simply, wiping my hands on a towel. "This is my home." He gave a small laugh, cold and humorless. "Of course." He looked at Marlene. "We talked about this, didn't we? About space." Marlene's voice trembled slightly. "David, please, don't start this now." He frowned. "I'm not starting anything. I'm just saying it's a bit crowded here. 3 generations under one roof. It's complicated." Ethan's little voice cut through the tension. "But Grandma makes the house happy." David froze, his jaw tightening. I wanted to tell Ethan to hush, to avoid making things worse, but the truth in his words was too pure to silence. David turned toward me again. "You've always had a way of turning people against me, haven't you?" I met his gaze calmly. "You're mistaken. I don't turn anyone against anyone. I just try to keep peace in this house." "Peace?" he snapped. "You call this peace? You've been meddling since you got here." Marlene stood abruptly. "David, stop it. She's done nothing wrong." But his anger had found its momentum now, building like a wave. "No, of course you defend her. You always do. She undermines me, and you let her." I took a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. "David, I understand you're frustrated. But anger isn't going to help any of us." He turned on me then, eyes burning. "You don't get to tell me how to feel, Alan. This isn't your house anymore. You should have stayed gone." The words struck like a slap. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the fire crackled quieter, as if afraid to interrupt. Ethan started crying softly, clutching his bear. "Don't yell at Grandma," he whimpered. Marlene rushed to his side, pulling him into her arms. "Enough," she shouted, her voice trembling. "This stops right now, David." He stared at her, startled. Marlene never raised her voice, ever. But there she was, shaking, tears glistening in her eyes. "You don't get to talk to my mother like that," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't get to make this house feel small. I won't let you." For the first time since I'd known him, David looked unsure. His anger faltered. He muttered something under his breath and walked out of the room, the sound of the front door slamming echoing through the house. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's small sobs filled it. I wrapped my arms around both of them, my daughter and my grandson, and held on tight. "It's all right," I whispered. "You're safe. Both of you." Marlene wept quietly into my shoulder. "I can't do this anymore, Mom. I can't keep pretending everything's fine." "You don't have to," I said softly. "You've been carrying too much alone." That night, Marlene didn't sleep in her bedroom. She and Ethan stayed with me in the guest room, all of us curled up together like we used to when she was a child. The storm outside raged, wind howling against the windows, but inside, something had shifted, something painful, yet necessary. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen table. It was from David. "I'm leaving for a while. I need space. Maybe we all do. No goodbye. No promise to return. Marlene stood behind me as I read it. She didn't cry. She just stared out the window, her voice barely above a whisper. I think this was bound to happen. I nodded slowly. Sometimes the breaking point isn't the end, Marlene. Sometimes it's the beginning of something better. She looked at me then, her eyes full of a quiet determination I hadn't seen in years. Maybe it's time I stopped being afraid. I smiled faintly. That's my girl. Later that afternoon, Ethan came to me holding his drawing again. This time, there were 4 figures. I added Grandpa, he said proudly. Because he's here too, right? I knelt down and kissed his forehead. Yes, sweetheart. He's always here. As the wind outside softened, the house finally felt lighter. Broken maybe, but open. Honest. And as I sat there watching my daughter and grandson laugh over a plate of warm cookies, I realized that sometimes love doesn't survive by avoiding pain, it survives through it. Sometimes you have to let things fall apart before you can build something true. And that night, as the fire burned low and the shadows danced on the walls, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for things to go back to the way they were, but for the strength to move forward. Because even in the breaking, there was beauty. Even in the silence, there was hope. Morning sunlight spilled through the frosted window panes of the Parker farmhouse, turning the kitchen into a golden haze. The scent of cinnamon, coffee, and baked apples filled the air, smells that had once symbolized warmth, family, and belonging. But this year, Thanksgiving had begun under the shadow of uncertainty. For weeks, Emma hadn't been sure if her family would even come. After the letter, after the tears and confrontations, the distance between her and her parents had felt insurmountable. They had called a few times, brief, awkward conversations filled with half-finished sentences and long silences. But then, 3 days ago, her mother had called again. "We'll come," her voice had trembled through the phone. "If you'll still have us." Now, standing in the kitchen with a trembling heart, Emma whispered to herself, "Yes, Mom. I'll always have you." She wiped her hands on a towel and looked around. The table was set with mismatched plates and her grandmother's old lace runner. A single pumpkin sat in the center, surrounded by candles that flickered softly. The turkey was still in the oven, slow roasting to perfection, while mashed potatoes, green beans, and cranberry sauce waited patiently in bowls. In the corner, Jamie was helping Ethan fold napkins. The little boy was humming, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," blissfully unaware of the tension that hung in the air. Jamie smiled, softly, tiredly, but her presence alone steadied Emma. "Do you think they'll come?" Jamie asked, her voice gentle but uncertain. "They said they would." Emma adjusted a fork that didn't need adjusting. "But I'll believe it when I see the car." Outside, the autumn wind carried the sound of rustling leaves and distant laughter from neighbors preparing for their own Thanksgiving meals. Everything felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath. At 11:42 a.m., the crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. Emma froze. Jamie looked up. "That's them." The front door creaked open, and the familiar sound of her father's voice floated in. "Smells like Thanksgiving in here." Emma turned around slowly. There they were, her parents, standing awkwardly in the doorway, holding a pie and a casserole between them. Her mother looked older, thinner, her once confident smile replaced by cautious hope. Her father's face was unreadable, the usual sternness softened by something like guilt, or maybe love. "Hi, sweetheart," her mother said, voice breaking just slightly. Emma swallowed hard. "Hi, Dad." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Ethan's small voice piped up from behind her, "Grandma, Grandpa." That broke the ice. Her mother knelt down, arms open wide, tears streaming down her face as she hugged the little boy who had changed everything. "Oh, look at you," she cried. "You've grown so much. You look just like your mom when she was your age." Ethan giggled, hugging her tightly. Her father crouched beside them, his eyes glistening as he ruffled Ethan's hair. "Hey there, sport," he said softly. "You've got quite the handshake?" Ethan stuck out his tiny hand solemnly. Her father shook it with exaggerated seriousness, making the boy laugh again. And just like that, the first crack in the wall of resentment began to crumble. By the time everyone gathered around the table, the room felt warmer, not just from the oven's heat but from something deeper, something that had been missing for years. Plates clattered. Glasses were filled. Conversations stumbled and then steadied, like a baby learning to walk again. Emma sat at the head of the table, watching the scene unfold with disbelief. Her father complimented the turkey. Her mother helped Jamie with the gravy. Ethan was telling a long story about his class project. A paper turkey made of colored feathers, and everyone actually listened. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt the fragile pulse of family coming back to life. Halfway through dinner, her mother cleared her throat. "Emma," she began, eyes glistening, "I owe you an apology." The table went silent. Even Ethan paused mid-bite. Her mother set down her fork. "When you left, when you chose your own path, I didn't understand. I was angry, scared. I thought you were rejecting everything we stood for. But now I see, I was the one pushing you away." Tears pricked Emma's eyes. "Mom." "No, let me finish," her mother insisted. "I read your letter. I must have read it 50 times. Every word broke me. But it also made me realize something. I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to show it anymore." Her father reached for her mother's hand, then turned to Emma. "Your mother's right. I've been stubborn, maybe too proud. But you've made a life here, Emma. A good one. And," he glanced at Ethan, "you've done a damn fine job raising him." Emma's breath caught. Her father rarely gave compliments, especially ones that raw. "Thank you," she whispered. Her mother dabbed at her eyes. "And Jamie," she said, turning to the woman sitting quietly beside Emma, "I owe you an apology too." Jamie blinked. "Me? Just, I wasn't kind to you when I should have been. I judged you without knowing you. But today, watching you help Ethan and seeing how happy my daughter is, I realize how wrong I was." Jamie smiled softly. "It's okay. Families take time. I understand." "No, it's not okay," her mother insisted. "But I want it to be. If you'll let me try." Jamie nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "You can try." Emma reached for both their hands. "You already are." Dinner continued with laughter, with awkward jokes, with stories of old holidays gone wrong. Her father accidentally dropped the serving spoon in the gravy boat, splattering his shirt, and even he laughed, a deep, genuine laugh Emma hadn't heard in years. After dessert, Ethan ran off to play with the wooden train set in the living room, and the adults lingered at the table. The candles burned low, the wax pooling like melted sunlight. Her father leaned back, sighing contentedly. "You know," he said, "I didn't think we'd ever have a Thanksgiving like this again." Emma met his eyes. "Neither did I." Her mother reached across the table, touching her daughter's hand. "Maybe that's what Thanksgiving's really about," she said softly. "Not just being thankful for what we have, but for what we can rebuild." Emma smiled. "Yeah. For second chances." Outside, the wind had quieted. Snowflakes had begun to fall, soft, slow, like feathers drifting from heaven. Ethan pressed his face to the window, squealing, "It's snowing." Everyone rushed to look. The world outside was transforming, every barren branch and broken fence dusted with white. Her father chuckled. "A white Thanksgiving. Haven't seen one of those in years." Her mother nodded. "It's a sign." Emma laughed lightly. Of what? Her mother smiled knowingly. That sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come quietly, like snow. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Emma stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the leftover pie and half-empty wine glasses. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to believing that forgiveness was impossible. She picked up the letter she had written months ago, still tucked under a magnet on the fridge. The ink had faded slightly, but the words still held weight. She didn't need to read it again. She knew it by heart. A hand slipped around her waist. It was Jamie. "They're asleep," Jamie whispered. "Your mom was telling Ethan a bedtime story. I think she cried halfway through it." Emma smiled, leaning into her. "I'm not surprised. She's been crying all day." Jamie chuckled softly. "Good tears, though." "Yeah," Emma said, looking at the flickering candles still burning low on the table. "Good tears." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and steady, blanketing everything in peace. For the first time in a long time, Emma didn't feel the cold. She felt whole. Tomorrow, there would be more words to say, more healing to do. But tonight, under the quiet hum of gratitude and the soft glow of forgiveness, she knew this was the miracle she had been waiting for. The miracle of love rediscovered. The miracle of family restored. The miracle of Thanksgiving. A year later, the Parker farmhouse looked different, but only because everything inside it had changed. Laughter now filled the rooms that once echoed with silence. The walls that had witnessed pain now held framed photographs of new memories, birthdays, family dinners, and snowmen built by Ethan and his grandparents. Emma often thought back to that one Thanksgiving, the day everything shifted. It wasn't perfect, healing never is, but it was real. Her parents visited often now. They called every week. And each time they did, there was no awkwardness, no hesitation, just love. That snowy Thanksgiving had been more than just a holiday. It had been a miracle, a moment when hearts softened, hands reached across old divides, and family found its way home again. Standing by the window one evening, watching the snow fall, Emma whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, to forgiveness, and to the people who never stopped trying. Because in the end, family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. It's about saying, "I'm sorry." And it's about never giving up on love, even when it hurts.